Good morning and welcome to the State of the Nation, episode 19, the future of franchising. So today we're going to talk about what are the trends that we are seeing and what does this mean for franchising and how does this affect the future. We'd like to welcome our speakers today. So we'd like to welcome Jake Bromwich, Managing Director and CEO of Rams. Morning, Jake.
Morning.
Richard Tame, CEO of Couriers Please. Morning, Richard.
Morning, everyone.
Anthony Grice, CEO of Clark Rubber. Morning, Anthony.
Good morning.
And welcome Brian Walker, CEO of Retail Doctor Group.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be here.
The webinar today will be recorded, so it will be available afterwards for a podcast and on YouTube. So if you do have to leave early, you'll be able to catch the end later, or if you do want to share it with anybody afterwards. We will also open it to Q&A at the end. So send your questions in through the Q&A function in the webinar, and we will ask them to our panelists as we go on. So to start the session, moving to Brian to give us a bit of an intro.
Good morning. What a fascinating topic, and how I appreciate if we are to have the quality of panelists that are with us today. Franchising, as we all know, nationally is about $150 billion business in total. Franchising of retail products is around that $90 billion mark. What's interesting, and really the topic of today, is to take this look into the future, effectively the future of retail, and that's where we'll focus our endeavours today, as it applies to franchising. As we move into this new world of the retail ecosystem, omni-channel retailing, and if we look at retailing, franchising in Australia, for example, we see that the great periods of growth for franchising were really in that shop on every corner, the importation of American brands into Australia, and they were really driving change. And then we saw a little bit of a decline in franchising, and as these numbers show, we're starting to move back up into growth. And the question is, where will the growth come from as we continue to grow? And so today, with the panelists' help, we're going to unpack some of these trends and changes. And this really talks to that. And we're seeing also franchise growth in a lot of the opportunities reflecting changes in consumption, changes in patterns of demographics, and all very much driven by technology, enabling mobility of customers. For example, fitness, financial, an aging population are all seeing the growth of franchise offers. So there is a fundamental question about the growth of franchise retail and the growth of franchise services within that mix. And so we've just picked off a few of the sort of the trends of the future, if you like, that will really are knocking on everyone's doors, and including franchisors. Shopping at the edge is one. For example, the growth of physical franchise retailing was predicated on geographical territories, and it still is. But of course, we know now that consumers shop more at the edge. We're on our smartphones 4.5 to 5 hours a day. We shop much more through a research function, much more mobility. We don't tend to shop in those geographical quadrants quite the way we did. And of course, that lends us into the growth of online retail and how franchisors will deal with that. And then we're seeing increasingly the intersection of technology, media, and retail. Amazon Prime is an example, the growth of 3PL and so forth. So we're seeing data playing a huge role. The classic piece around what will shops look like with the currency of time? Will businesses adapt to the way consumers use time? Time well saved, time well spent in the offer. In time to come, the rise of the machines. The simple view of that, of course, in time to come will be augmented reality and this mixed reality piece, which we should talk to at some point. And so what will that mean for franchisors? There's a lot to unpack. The rise of the branded offer. As we see more and more complexity in markets, the growth of marketplaces, we will see a need to cut through in an even more differentiated way in terms of the branded offer. How will franchisors respond to that? I touched on this earlier, the rise of the service economy. No doubt we're seeing increased rise of mobility in franchise offers, carpet cleaning, pool servicing, a range of service offers, as data enables franchisors to reach out to their communities. So instead of having consumers come into the shop the way that franchisors grew, now we're seeing this ability of Muhammad, if you like, to take it to the mountain. And what does that mean in this ecosystem for the physical shop? Increasingly, we believe that retailers will sell less out of shops themselves, and that will be much more of a showrooming consummation experience. And quite often the purchase will be done pre that or post that, and it will be a different environment in time to come. And then finally, the disintermediation of channels. As manufacturers become retailers, retailers become manufacturers, the blurring of the lines. Now, of course, much of this is not happening today, but the seeds are being sown, and that's what we want to explore.
And one of the things I want to touch on here is how has consumer behavior changed? So let's have a look at the day in the life of the future consumer. And this was a slide that we talked about a few years ago. And I'm bringing it back for a reason, because this was, I think, about 2018. You make plans to virtually try on a new look at a local store with a local store event with friends. You whip together a party in minutes, having items sent to you by drone, and you find a birthday gift in a few clicks that lands on your doorstep. Dragging bags through a crowded mall will be 2018. Now, this was one of the things that we wrote a few years ago. And then I'm looking at it again today thinking, well, tick, tick, tick. These are all the things that we've seen really come into play in the last 12 to 18 months with consumers. The use of virtual try-on, augmented reality to try products, touch products, look at products in your own home, the ability to get things delivered in 30 minutes now or even less for some of the aggregators that are coming in. We've seen deliveries by drone also being started. So consumers have now really moved into this. I want it now. I want it immediately. And also I want this experience. And Brian touched on this time as a currency. And one of the consumer trends we have seen is that time is much more important to consumers now. And it's in this time well spent versus time well saved. So they're looking to retailers to either make it quick, simple, fast, frictionless experience. How can you save us time? Versus give me an experience worth leaving the house for. So I think this is where we're moving to, and seeing this divide between these two types of retail grow significantly through the eyes of the consumer. So I think one of those challenges is understanding, do we sit in the time well spent or time well saved? And then how do we bring this to life? So these were a few of the trends that we saw from a consumer perspective and what we see moving forward. So quite a lot really do overlap with what Brian's touched on. So time is a currency, retail as an activity. So we're seeing that now consumers are allowed to leave the house. They're actually using retail as an activity, as an enjoyment. I call it retailtainment. So it's a form of entertainment. I'm going to come in the stores. So what does that mean from a store perspective? Well, we have to have stores that are giving consumers a reason to visit. We've seen the massive boom of consumer loyalty. So consumers are really connecting to brands, and they're wanting to be brand advocates. They are really wanting to join loyalty programs and to be part of a retailer's community. So this is, again, one of those challenges from a franchise perspective. Well, how do we build a brand loyalty rather than an individual store loyalty? We touched on pre-research, so they're much more educated when they come in the door now. So consumers probably know more about the products and the staff after they've researched everything. So what does this mean in terms of retail? We've got digital, the rise of social media. We've seen that now social media can influence, especially in our Gen Z demographic, almost 3/4 of them are influenced by social media to choose a retailer and purchase a product. So there's such a huge influence of social media, even the ones that are very much, so TikTok, which has really only become prevalent in the last 12 to 18 months, is now influencing around 30 to 40% of some consumer segments. So really understanding what does that mean for the business. Brand ethics kind of slipped off the table last year a little bit. It became a lower priority, but consumers are bringing this back to top of mind again. And finally, this local and Australian has been very much a theme throughout the pandemic. And we do expect to see this going forward, which does put franchisees in quite a good position from their local Australian-owned businesses. So how, again, do we see this moving forward? And what does this mean for franchisees? And
so you start to see a little bit of text on this, but you should start to see some key success factors. Franchisors really developing loyalty customer databases. So this idea that franchising was a decentralized distribution network, each franchisee captured data, well, somewhat variably, and there was always this question about who owns the customer. Increasingly, we see that database as vital, and we see it being far more centralized. Differentiation, clear market position is obviously critical, and the panelists will speak to that. Franchisors' business expertise, and actually I'd say the franchisees' business expertise. One of the questions will be, where will the next generation of franchisees come from? And what skills and expertise will they need to build a sustainable future? Omnichannel we've touched on, we'll come back to. This idea of control, stock on stock, inventory, really vital to point of difference, vital to sustainability. Brand image is distinct from brand identity. Consistency of delivery will continue to be vital. And it will also take us into areas such as how can the brand be carried into pop-ups, kiosks, etc. Franchisee workforce, skill sets, what will they need? What will we need to build a franchisor business of the future, linked to our expertise? And as I've touched on today already, the centralizing of brand. So franchising was very much a decentralized brand, but again, the current is to bring it back into a more centralized view of the world.
Fantastic. And I think at that point, we will then open it up to our questions to our panel.
Thanks,
So,
Anastasia.
welcome to our panel.
Thanks again, Richard, Jake, and Anthony. In full transparency, we've sent some questions out, and what we'll do is I'll go through and ask the first respondent, but gentlemen, please jump in with any commentary at any point. And so the first question together is, and really building on this retail ecosystem phase, as retail or franchise retail moves into a retail ecosystem, offline, online, social media, growth in marketplaces, what will the franchise sector need to do to adapt and evolve? Anthony, I might turn to you if I may.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Look, really interesting times that we're in, and I think in the Australian marketplace that has been a marketplace that's really lagged in adoption to moving to online retailing. Over the course of the last 2 years, we've seen those numbers substantially increase, to north of 20% of revenue now going through e-com. And look, I think, consumers are less sensitized to the type of ownership structure of a retail business that they shop in, and they're more linked to the brand. And so, I say that in the respect of they don't really care that it's a franchise business. They're shopping with the brand. And so consumers are more and more educated based on the services and the solutions that they're provided by the market as a whole. So that's the major retailers that are driving that. And, that's really, I think, one of the reasons. And certainly COVID has driven the increase in penetration with e-com. But of course, most retailers have invested heavily, ourselves included at Clark Rubber. So, I think for the franchising sector and retailers in that sector in particular, you need to compete. So, it's investing in people, getting the right people on board to be able to establish the strategies and the strategic framework that's required to then present and compete competently, both in an online, offline, and a social sense. When we're talking about marketplaces are, really important. And there's been an explosion in not only the traditional marketplaces such as eBay and Amazon, but also in bolt-on marketplaces. And we've seen a lot of large retailers bolt on marketplaces like solutions like Marketplacer. And I think that poses an interesting point or question for franchise businesses, particularly those that specialize in a certain area. It's really important not to, dull down or lose your unique selling proposition, the core products that you stand for. So, interesting times, but I think the franchising sector absolutely can compete, but it's really making sure that you're presenting a contemporary offer, an offer that sits well with, what contemporaries or your competitor set is offering consumers.
Yeah, I think I listened to that, Anthony, and I agree. I think this will come into this topic of what sort of franchisee skill sets will we need, because that rise of brand, and I agree, requires an even more consistent delivery, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I'm a big believer in, the investment that needs to happen, as I said, in people, but, in systems also. So, clearly that's an area that If you look at IT infrastructure, e-com infrastructure, I don't think that there would be a major retailer or even smaller retailers across Australia that haven't invested significantly in that space over the last 5 years, and even more so over the course of the last couple of years of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Anastasia, what do you see as, thank you, Anthony, what do you see as some of the key customer trends going forward? Anything you've touched on?
Yeah, and I think Anthony touched on this quite well, actually. What we're seeing is this rise of brand and customers really wanting to have this emotional connection with a brand. They don't see the individual store. They don't see the differential between online. It's the brand that they're going to. And I think this is one of the challenges that we're going to see in that franchise is the customer doesn't see the individual stores. But what I did touch on previously was that there's still this rise of local. So franchise businesses are actually in this fantastic position of being able to have the best of both worlds, of being able to be local, independent businesses, but at the same time have this brand love. So I think having this centralised brand will be one of the big challenges for franchise groups moving forward. And through the eyes of the consumer, having this consistent touch points, consistent ability to really keep that relationship. And we're seeing this more and more with consumers becoming brand advocates and talking about brands that they've purchased from almost as a point of pride. So I think this is something we'll continue to see grow.
If I was being provocative, I'd suggest that's challenging. And it's challenging because of a range of things. It's a great opportunity, and you're absolutely right. But it's challenging as well because we need to get a greater consistency. And I think what Anthony alludes to is exactly right as well. It's this ability to invest in the systems and the architecture, but the ability then to have the human factor of the brand, the emotionalizing of the brand, the insights work, of course, and also the relationship, the human relationship. And I think the other issue that links to this, and Richard, I'll turn to you if I may, but as customers become increasingly mobile, devices and so forth, and this high pre-research, what might that mean for franchise sector geographical territories?
Yeah, I think you're right, Brian. I think the reality these days is that it's really quite easy to be consistent online, but it's frustrating as a consumer when you don't get that level of consistency and when you don't get the experience that you're looking for in store. So I think that's one of the real challenges for franchise brands as well. I was reading a blog article that you wrote recently, and you somewhat unkindly described franchise sector as an aging rock band, or I think so I guess that makes Jake Mick Jagger and Anthony Keith Richards, and but I think
it's a question rather than a statement, Richard. But anyway, yeah,
I think the sector's a little bit more like Madonna, and I say that because the franchising sector's got this amazing ability to reinvent itself because it's entrepreneurial by nature. So I think the kind of to go back to your question about mobile experiences. I don't know anybody who would be contemplating buying a franchise these days or joining a franchise group that wasn't omni-channel, that didn't have a big investment in digital, that didn't have, a strategy to be part of a marketplace. So the reality is that I don't think franchisors will have a choice in the future. I think the customers made the choice for us. They've clearly said that I want to shop on a mobile device. And certainly, I spent a lot of time in the delivery space, and our customers are saying to us very clearly, you're an extension of our brand. So, the customer's saying my retail experience now begins when I start researching online, and it's probably on the bus or in a cafe in the morning. And I don't consider that experience to have finished until I receive it in good order. And I think in future the experience won't be finished until they've gone and shared a photo of it with their friends and tried it online and someone else has bought it too. So all of a sudden, whether we like it or not, consumers are dictating the way that they're going to shop in the future. And I don't think any of us own the customer. I don't think the customer wants to be owned anymore. I think all of those expressions have kind of gone.
And what's interesting with this, Richard, if I take it one step further, is to think through this idea that I don't necessarily bind myself to that franchisee in any particular location.
Yeah, and that challenges the whole territory model. I mean, and franchise territories are interesting. I think they were designed to protect franchisees and to say, okay, we're coming into this, discrete environment. You're coming into a brand, and brand's important because that's something that you could never create yourself.
And you've invested in that, accordingly.
And you've invested in it, and you had equity in this area. I just think that in some cases it absolutely makes sense for franchise businesses to have discrete territories. But I think going forward, that model is going to be absolutely challenged, and customers are going to say, well, if I get a great experience from this franchisee, or they have an area of expertise that appeals to me, then that's where I'll go. And I think the modern franchise systems that are able to capture that expertise are going to do really, really well going forward. And those that don't are going to get left behind.
I think it's a good point, Richard. I was just going to add to that, a bit about the conversation before in terms of the customer isn't sometimes aware that they're dealing with a local franchisor. And this is also a challenge that plays into place where you've got franchise owned and corporate owned. And if a franchise does a sale and a corporate does the service, that piece from a customer point of view, they're dealing with the brand and they want help along the way. And that's some of the challenges that will face franchising going forwards as well that we need to adapt to.
And Jake, it's a good point. And so it also steps into this idea from a data perspective, who owns the customer and what might that mean for franchisors?
Yeah, I think to Richard's point, the concept that someone owns a customer suggests there's a bit more of a commodity, which they're not, right? They're highly valued customers throughout the whole way. And the customer data, and I'll get to your response on that one, but I think the future of data is the customer will own their own data. If you think of what's happening with Google and the bigger piece, to sit there and debate who owns the data today is not thinking fully about the future, and the customer will own their data, and there's more data rights and control coming in. And as a finance industry, we're one of the first people that have to hand over that data by law now for customers, and it's a big piece of work. The way I think about it though today is, yes, the franchisees they collect a lot of data for us from the consumer. And they utilize a lot of that data as well in terms of the sales. There's also, from our point of view, data is a big cyber risk as well. So we need to control the use, the collection, the security of that data as well. And then the way we work with that is, we use the data ourselves from centralized marketing, customer relationship campaigns, but we also use that data or provide the data back to our franchisees to help them look after customers and the customer relationship. So when they're here running that territory, we want them to be able to utilize the data, whether they've collected or we've collected it, to help embed the relationship with the customer, make that customer a great advocate of RAMs. But ultimately, we have a greater controlling ownership of the data. And back to sort of your trends you were talking about earlier in terms of what's important for a franchisor, we do believe it's really important for us to control the data, manage the quality of that data, but then also allow franchisees to utilize that to attract, retain, develop our customers as well.
Thanks, Jake. Anthony, do you have a thought on that?
Look, I tend to agree, with the comments that have been made by both Richard and Jake, albeit Jake coming from a financial background, which, a little bit different to retail, but, interesting points, but I agree on that.
Mm. And so, Anthony, I'll stay with you if I may. Is retail, if we think about franchising in its zenith years, it was the shop on every corner, it was the department store in every suburb, and it was all about scale growth. And it was extremely successful in that period. We're seeing the contraction of that physical space now. We're seeing department stores going through all the things that we know so well. We're seeing the middle ground starting to contract a little bit in physical retail. What might that mean for franchisor distributions? Will we see more showrooming? Can franchisors adopt more into kiosks, pop-ups, more mobility in the way the brand plays out?
Yeah, good question. This is an interesting one. Last week I was in Adelaide spending a couple of days with the Large Format Retailers Association, nonetheless, and I spent 2 days driving around looking at future developments for large format retail precincts. And let me tell you, there's a huge amount of investment happening around the country in development of commercial space. So, you spend some time looking at that, and then it's interesting to then ponder over questions like this. Look, I think there's no doubt that there will be, further contraction, and particularly maybe with smaller players and some of the larger players. Certainly, we're seeing that in the department store sector. Look, for me, one of the challenging components of this for any franchise system to navigate its way through is around just the distribution of revenue. So, if you've got a franchise retail business structure that is determined based on an owner-operator deriving a revenue within their particular region, it's really important that franchisors are able to structure a financial revenue distribution structure that would allow the business to move to more an e-com ecosystem and to be able to compete with the changing demands of the Australian consumer and global consumer, and do that in a way that it remains fair and equitable for all of those within the system. Uniquely different to the challenges of a corporate structure, of course, and with the move to internet, we've seen that in some retail stores, the numbers I talked about 25% or thereabouts penetration with e-com. In some retail locations, it's significantly higher than that. So if you think of the revenue decline out of a store that may be acting as a fulfillment center for click and collect, and that movement to online, the revenue shift is actually quite substantial. So for any franchise system, they have to compete in this space. I mean, the reality is that's what the consumer's looking for. So it's about establishing a program that sits around that doesn't disadvantage the franchisee at the local level, that also provides them the opportunity to continue to provide maybe a fulfillment service, but notwithstanding the fact that, consumers are still wanting an experience. They're still wanting an education. And so if you're a retailer that's providing and retailing those types of unique products and services, there's always going to be, I believe, a position for you to prosper in a bricks and mortar sense. And that's taking what they learn in the online, in the e-com sense, and also socials, and then sort of molding that with that experience in store.
Yeah, I mean, really good points, and maybe we'll continue with those. Jake, do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, definitely. And I think for us, right, we're a service-based industry, selling home loans to our customers. And so there's an element where we actually, all our franchisees have the bricks and mortar. And it's actually a really important part. It's not necessarily where they do business or where they do sales or how they generate sales. For us, there's an element, one is it creates the strength in the brand, provides trust to a consumer that, we are a real Rigiditch business, right? We've been around 27 years and one of the biggest players in the market. But it provides that sense of, belonging to a customer as well. It's a big branding exercise for our franchisees as well, that local franchise. We had one move from Bondi Junction to Randwick recently, and no one ever told me they knew we had a franchise in Bondi Junction. He's got this awesome site on a corner of an intersection in Randwick, and I get phone calls every second week about, you've got this new store. So it provides that sort of presence as well in that local market and that community. And I'll say, the support, the service, the sales isn't necessarily done there. Like almost all customers go online and do research before they go and buy a home loan, before they come and talk to us. So there's that element of you've got to be able to connect the two. You've got to be able to go and serve customers where they need to be served as well. And you have to have that intersection. So of our sort of leads we generate for our franchisees, I think it's almost 80% of them come through our website. So for us at the moment, we're investing heavily into a new website build because that's a future asset for lead generation, just as much as it's important to have the bricks and mortar on the stores as well, on the corners. So I think there's certainly that intersection. Territories is an interesting thing. We operate heavily territory, but what we're seeing more and more of is franchisees working across territories to do combined marketing and understanding the power of the brand. And the fact that, Gold Coast is a great example. 3 franchisees, almost all their local area marketing territory they do is joint, because they understand that they've got more power in doing that and connecting with a consumer rather than being overly protective of this is your boundary, this is my boundary as well.
I think that's a good point. And the point about collaboration is an important one. Richard, if I may, just your view on the physical space.
I think, Brian, for the last 100 years, department stores and banks have had an enormous structural advantage. They've had the bricks and mortars, they've been able to finance their activities, and, consumers got the message through television and newspapers. all of a sudden we're just going through this period of readjustment. So I think it's tremendously exciting for franchise businesses, because they've now got leverage that they didn't have before, and they can now compete more openly. But I think the challenge for franchisors is going to be, how do you restructure your model with your franchisees going forward? Because most of the big brands, and we talked about trusted brands, and let's face it, as a consumer, I want to buy from a trusted brand. I'm looking for a quality product or service, but I want it delivered by a trusted brand. So I think for established franchisors, there's going to be a real challenge. How do I take my franchisees on the journey, and how do I restructure fundamentally that financial arrangement with them going forward? And it's much easier for smaller systems that can be quite agile and are starting off from scratch and can accelerate quite quickly in the current environment, I think, as well.
No, great answers. I touched on this earlier, but it's interesting to see where the growth in the franchise sector might come from. It seems to me that we're moving more and more towards technology-assisted services. Technology enables us to take our business out to customers, invariably in service-type environments. Couriers Please is a great example. Full servicing, carpet cleaning, financial services, the fitness industry, services for the aging of our population, and so forth. Jake, do you see that as an area of growth for franchising?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it is definitely an area of growth, because when you're talking about the service, and for us, a home loan can be seen as a commodity. You can get them from lots of different providers at a very similar rate. But there's a big difference in, it's a big purchase, and that personalized service is important. So yes, there are some, players out there that claim to be able to do it fully online. That's a separate conversation for us. But what we see is it's actually, because of the size of the decision, they actually want that personalized service. So they'll do a lot of research online, but really want that human interaction enabled. And even, for example, if they go online and they get almost all the way through to buying and almost hit the buy button, the fact that they can then speak to someone local near them to give them that trusted advice is actually something that we're seeing playing out more and more. And it's where we compete heavily in the space where the customer wants that service and personalized experience. So I think, that's not just in our industry, it's across a lot of industries where you will see that service side, because it is that human interaction they need, and therefore you need franchise. A franchise model is a great way to distribute that. It's a way where I find, you've got the old skin in the game conversation, which provides a greater level and a better level of service, I believe, than you can provide under a corporate model, corporate ownership model, because you do have that investment, the local entrepreneurship. We spoke about that consistency of service before. I think the franchise model gives you a consistency of service, but with that personalized local demographic flair as well, which really adds to the value of that proposition. So I do think that the service base, the hairdressing, these things that are going to continue to be required for years and years to come. And I suppose sometimes some of the services are harder to move online. Some of it does move online. The intersection is there, but I think that it's definitely an opportunity for franchising to push heavier into the service space.
It seems to me, Jake, and I'll ask Anthony to comment on this, but that brands that have grown up through franchising from the physical retail sense now see a brand that has invitation to play in a more mobile environment and to add bolt on, if you like, to that core offer, the big physical shops, if you like, ancillary services. And I will go to Anthony on this, because pool servicing is one area, for example, that makes sense. But there are many other areas where retailers with that network have invitation, and franchisors are starting to think in that way, carpet cleaning and the like. Anthony, do you see that as an area of growth?
Yeah, I certainly do, Brian. And, I certainly agree with the comments that Jake's made. We at Clark Rubber specialise in pool foam and rubber and on-site service. So that service arm is absolutely critical. And it's a competitive advantage. Consumers are not necessarily able to install their own equipment, and that's most consumers. So that's not just caring and maintaining a pool, but it's also servicing it and replacing maybe broken equipment, and that's quite specialised. So shopping with a retailer that not only can sell and has great knowledge in those areas of, such as pool and the expertise that sits around that, but also being able to provide the solution to have someone in home to be able to repair, maintain, and do what needs to happen. I think you touched on the numbers earlier, and you talked about the franchising sector and the total value of it. You then broke that down and talked about retail being around 90 billion a year. I mean, the reality is there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of single small business operators that are situated right around this great country who are earning a very good living through the franchising sector. And, there has been definitely a shift to services. And we saw that in the graph that you presented. And I think franchising really lends itself well to sort of those individual operators that are wanting to break into the market. Low unemployment poses a little bit of a challenge, for those sort of smaller franchise systems. But, I think that we'll see some changes in the not too distant future in terms of unemployment rates. And again, franchising, particularly in the service sector, I think provides just a wealth of opportunity for anybody wanting to jump on board and, be their own boss and own their own business.
Yeah, no, I agree, Anthony. And I think from a consumer point of view, I wonder if we are moving from a do-it-yourself to do-it-for-me, which, of course, was the great lament of Bunnings moving into the UK. There's a culture of do-it-for-me.
And I think undoubtedly that we're moving more towards do-it-for-me.
And I think, Brian, if I can just jump in there, I think there's you're being very polite. There's no doubt we've got lazier over the years. But I think there's another reason that you're seeing a disproportionate pivot by the franchising sector towards services, and that's because franchisors need one thing above all else. They need franchisees. And franchisees are normal people, and they're saying, well, these days I don't necessarily want to invest a huge amount of money in a bricks and mortar facility. I don't want to enter into a long-term lease, and I don't necessarily want to work 10 or 12 hours a day. I want the flexibility. And typically they're more likely to get that in the services sector. And franchising, over the last 30 years has been a full-time thing. Whereas operating in the services sector lends itself to part-time. It lets you have a couple of different jobs. You can see the rise of the gig economy. And I think if franchisors don't evolve, then that is the natural threat. People will say it's so much easier to be part of the gig economy. Sure, it doesn't have the level of security, but I also don't need to make the level of investment. So if franchisors can say, well, hey, you do have a greater level of flexibility, you've got a low entry and low capital investment, but we can provide you through our technology with some fantastic back office systems, marketing, then I think you'll see a whole new range of franchisees come back into the market, and you'll see the evolution of the sector.
Richard, on that point, it's a great answer. What skill sets will the franchisee and conversely the franchisor of the future need?
And I think what we're seeing more generally, we're seeing the rise of the digital natives, and that I think is the ability to promote yourself on the run, and the challenge there is going to be how does that fit with the way that we've looked at traditional brand and marketing. So I think absolutely agile people that are prepared to learn, that are prepared and happy, and in fact want to have 4 or 5 different careers will really thrive in that environment.
There's an interesting statistic that comes out of the Amazon data that says that 55% of our consumption is habitual on average, and everything's in patterns, and everything can be traced by algorithms, everything can be predicted, and there's the use of machine learning. And I wonder if that isn't one of the future skill sets of a franchisor, to be able to capture, disseminate that sort of patterns, that data, and use that to the franchisee's advantage.
I think it is, but it's also how do you create in a traditional employment environment, you can create a career path for somebody who's got talent, and that's the way that you retain them. And I think the one of the challenges for franchisors going forward is, how do I retain my most talented franchisees? Because it just doesn't become about money. People are going to get bored. They're going to look for a greater level of challenge. They're going to be enticed by something else. So I think that's the other element to consider. If we're all saying we want better quality people and high quality people, and we all do, then you've got to keep them engaged. So I think, using that data, it's not just to attract customers. I think it's going to be just as much about keeping your franchisees engaged in the future.
I think it's a good point, Richard. And we talk a lot about people, right? And if I think through, what are some of the biggest challenges, and we talk to new prospective franchisees all the time. It's getting your team, getting a great team, great people, and it's for us as well, a franchisor. And then the career pathway that a franchisee can offer as well. I think there's something there that, if compared to, say, a big corporate, it's different. It's probably more restricted, but compared to a small business owner out on their own, they've got a huge advantage in what they can offer from an employment proposition point of view. We're seeing right now, we've opened 22 new franchises in the last year. And what we are seeing is quite a lot of homeline managers that, they were an employee of the franchisee are taking out the shop. In some cases, the franchisee is going out in partnership with them to start a new store, to stay involved and to invest. We've had H1s that left the business to go and pursue excellence, and now they've come back as a franchisee as well. So I think there's a different skills and how you prepare and how do you build this strong team. But I think there's also in franchising an added benefit that from a career pathway for them to their employees, compared to, say, a standalone small business trying to compete, there is something more bigger in the, we call it the Rams family, that is available for them. And we have staff go from head office out to franchises and vice versa sometimes. So it's a interesting point, but I think the adaptability for franchisor or franchisee, the willingness to change, that you need to change before the change happens as well. And sometimes that's hard when people have been around for a while, but I think now more and more we're seeing our franchisees being understand that we have to, the old way of doing things will not work next year, and therefore we're going to change now.
Yeah, and I wonder too, it's a good point, Jake. I wonder, Anthony, without unpacking this too deeply, whether the classic and traditional RAM and sort of royalty model is the model going forward, because you talked about omni-channel and you talked about, and we've seen franchisors over the years that have put on board, a network of regional managers. There's not a lot left at the end of the day. And I wonder, as I look at that, what that model could look like in time to come. Something to think about?
I think it needs to be. We're in a really dynamic market, aren't we? So, with the change that's ahead of us, that many retailers and service operators are already going through, and the investment that's required, it's that real fine line of, franchisor needs the revenue to be able to invest heavily into the business to then enable the business to compete, particularly in that dynamic marketplace. But I think the paradigms, the old systems will be very much challenged into the future and the not too distant future.
Yeah, I share that. Anastasia, you've been quietly listening to all this, but I'm interested to know your view on franchisor's brand and whether that will be more important going forward.
Well, yes, I sort of touched on before, the consumers are really looking for that brand. And I think one of the things that Jake mentioned before is about that consumers are wanting to connect, I suppose, emotionally with people. And it's this human connection, and potentially also one of the rise of the services. Trust has become an important factor, even more so in the last sort of 12 months. So having that brand as a trust factor, but having that human connection at the end as that almost, the natural, everyone's human, everyone wants to speak to someone and have that ability to have service. So I think moving forward, the brand of the franchisor will be first and foremost of the importance through the eyes of the consumer. I think we're seeing consumers move quite a lot to that, wanting to connect with a brand, wanting to be part of the brand, wanting to be part of the brand family. We're seeing this through, social media. We're seeing it through even people wearing branded t-shirts and hoodies. I mean, I don't know if anyone saw the launch of the Aldi hoodies and socks. So you can now, I think this was in Europe, but you could, buy an Aldi hoodie and Aldi socks, Aldi tracksuit, sold out. So it's this connection with a brand and wanting to be part of that brand family that I think will become, it's just going to grow and grow.
I think the interesting thing here is, of course, that it's the emotional attachment to the brand. It's how franchisors build tribes, build communities. And Richard, I know in your experience, that's been a big part of your thinking around how franchisors grow. They grow through building these tribes, communities.
Yeah, and I think part of that, the best ideas typically in franchising come from franchisees. So I think it's being able to make sure that you can protect your brand, have a level of consistency in your platform. I think your point before about data is absolutely right. It needs to be managed centrally, but used locally, and I think that's going to be the part of the secret going forward. And these are easy things to say, but difficult things to do in practice, because franchisees are entrepreneurial and parochial by nature. So I think that relationship between franchisee and franchisor, and that's why things like having a robust franchise advisory council, I think are going to be important. And I think the way that franchisee and franchisor work in terms of developing strategy needs to change. And we've seen it in other industries. I mean, you see it. The ABC has a journalist and staff representative on the board. Mercedes-Benz globally has a staff representative on the board. So I think we've started that in the traditional structure around franchising, and I think we've seen, and we've all as franchisors been under a lot of pressure, and we've seen reforms to the code. But I think what you're going to see now is a far more collaborative approach between high-performing franchisees and the franchisor in terms of developing the future strategy.
I think it's a good point, Rich. I was going to add to the brand side as well. For us, like the traditional strategy house, your house, your pillars, and your floor. For us, the roof of the house is love our brand. And we talk about that with our franchisees, and it comes down to things like compliance as well, right? Protect our brand, love our brand, invest in our brand, because that is why, a lot of them come to us, why they're here with us. And then at the bookend at the bottom, greater together, which is what we're all about, which is actually about, we succeed if they succeed. So we want them to be really, really successful. I want to see them do very, very well. And then also it's about, together, it's about partnership. So if something works and we talk about, all the answers are in the room, and you say, best ideas come from franchisees. With a similar concept, all the answers, all the solutions are in the room, and that's when we're at a national conference, right? So it's sort of, I think, the greatest leaders and greatest brands and franchisors are going to be those ones that listen to franchisees really, really well and incorporate and collaborate their ideas. It won't always be we can do that. There'll be other things we have to think about, but that's where you can get a lot of that innovation from.
And I think something maybe touch on there as well is this. We talk about, all of our consumers wanting a personalized experience, but that is actually coming about from our franchisees who purchase. So understanding what their different drivers are, because you'll find, as I think Richard said, they're entrepreneurial by nature, but then some actually come into it because it's reliable. So understanding what drives each franchisee then helps build that kind of relationship, because not everyone's got the same goals or same needs, even just within the franchisee network, as we've seen quite a lot.
And it can be a little confusing. For 30 years, as franchisors have said, follow the system. That's what success looks like. And now all of a sudden we're saying, got to be agile, we've got to adapt. So I think the onus is therefore on franchisors to explain what we mean by that and just give practical examples. And again, the best case is to take a couple of high performing franchisees and get them to share their experience.
I think this is an interesting point too, because in any franchise network, and you've alluded to this, high-performing franchisees, obviously we want the entire channel to be high-performing. And I listen to this and think to myself, well, how do we get even greater consistency and performance, Richard, in our franchisees? What are some of the areas that you've?
I think what you would do in a corporation is you move people around. And you don't do that in franchising, and it goes back to the whole argument about a territory-based system. So it's creating a safe environment where it's okay. And I think Jake mentioned the kind of one team, we're stronger together, that one team approach. So and if you look at the successful franchise systems, they always have a blend of people that have actually been franchisees, worked at the coalface, and are now working in the support office. So I think it's getting that blend right with some outside thinking as well to avoid the kind of group think syndrome. But it's without a doubt, it's being able to trial some things and get that cross-pollination of ideas and break down the traditional boundaries that you have and there are trust issues in franchise systems inevitably. So it's breaking through that as the first step, I think.
I think some good points there, Richard. And I'd also add to it that, like all business owners, each business owner has a different goal or aspiration of what they actually want out to achieve in their franchise. So we'll have, some franchisees that, have, big goals and dreams of owning lots of properties and, making lots of money and doing really well and helping loads and loads of customers, and that's great. And then you've got other franchisees that, they want to run their smaller family business, enjoy their lifestyle, work-life balance a bit more, whereas some are focused on, I'll enjoy my life balance afterwards. And I think, I know I sort of think from Greg Nathan there, he talks a lot about, in all his work as well, the cycle of a franchisee and where they're at on that stage of their franchise journey as well. So I think Richard's point around how do you bring them, connect them together, we're not going to move them from, territory to territory or office to office, but we spend a lot of time. I suppose one of the things we really missed in COVID was the connection and collaboration between franchisees across states, across territories. And getting back out on the road, it's what they're all really enjoying and saying, this is why I'm part of a franchise network. Like I felt a little bit alone. I had my virtual connection during COVID, but what it did remind them is that how important the franchise ecosystem was. And we have, sessions, Ram's Eye Dialogue, where we get the high performers up and talk. I think we need to also be realistic around not everyone's going to be, you're always going to sort of have that 80-20, 70-30 type rule play on. But how you help lift and give the others the opportunity to come up where they want, but also focusing on what are their business goals. And so we have monthly meetings with every franchisee on how they're tracking for their business goals, not so much ours.
It's a good point, Jake, and I think we talk and in these sessions you can talk a lot about big data and the IT side of things, but I think there's a danger there. To me, big data is just the modern day storefront equivalent. And it's how do you fire up the people to get motivated and get excited about the brand? Because I don't know about everybody else on the call, but I don't get that when I walk into a traditional department store today. I'm not feeling the love. Whereas that's where we've got the opportunity is in franchising, I think. And people buy from people they like. I don't think that's changed with all of the data science that's developed in the last 20 years.
Anthony, do you have a view on that? Great comment from Richard.
Sorry, I was on mute there for a moment. Look, I totally agree. In our business, we're about to break away and have a national conference next week in Brisbane. It's the first one we've had in two and a half years. So it's going to be great to get the team together. And of course, over that period, we've welcomed a large number of new franchise partners. So, I agree with Jake. In franchising, you need to understand as the franchisor, what is the motivators for each of the franchisees, and that will be different. And trying to manage them all at that same level is never going to work. So it's a combination, I think, of understanding your franchisees and having the right support team that sits around that. So, investing heavily in your support team, getting the right skills to be able to get the best out of your franchisees, and then harnessing, the best practice, those franchisees that are the best, and it might not be the best across every aspect of the business, but the areas that they specialize in. In our business, we've got about 15% of our network is made up of company stores. So we've got a really great sandpit to play in, to cultivate ideas. That, in conjunction with working with, our franchisees, gives us the ability to test into things before we move forward and roll that out across the network. So, I think all of these factors are really important for a franchise system of 23 and beyond.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. I want to move into another area if I can. And Jake, I'm interested in your views here, but franchise operators and other panelists, of course, have faced a long period of disruption. We've had changing market dynamics, which we've talked about, regulatory focus, increased competition, and a lot of pressure on the franchisor-franchisee relationship. Where to from here in regards to management, compliance, and governance in franchising?
Yeah, it's a good point, and we're probably an industry for us. We've had there was the Banking Royal Commission plus the franchise inquiry going on at once, right? So we had from every angle in terms of working through that. I think for us, in terms of it's really critical to work with our franchisees on that. So one, there's a role we have to play in ensuring they understand the context and the why of what we're doing, and ultimately it all comes back to for us. It comes back to protecting the customers, protecting them and their businesses, and protecting our business, and doing it all together. So we talk a lot about, the role of risk and compliance really is to make sure that we all have the opportunity to run our businesses and to do well and to look after more and more customers. So from a risk and compliance front, it's important, I think, for us, engaging with our franchisees in terms of what are the challenges or the risk or compliances we need to manage and deal with, and working with them in terms of how we actually go about doing that. There's some things that, maybe provocative on the regulatory front where I think you've got to provide all this extra information to prospective franchisees, and they end up walking away with a 400-page document. How many of them really read it? It's not about more information. It's about less appropriate targeted information that franchisees need to make their decisions. And from a risk and compliance point of view, it's critical as a franchisor to be proactively managing risk. You get yourself into trouble when you're responding, you're reacting to something that's happened. So it's about that forward-thinking view of what will happen. I find very much our franchisees that love, protect our brand, that have been around for a while, they'll tell me what's happening out in the network and if there's something I need to keep an eye on, because they care about the brand and they understand that it's actually about protecting their business for the future and enabling that. Sometimes, to be fair, we've probably gone a little bit hard on a couple of things around the compliance front, but we've eased back on recently and working with the franchisees and what works and how it can actually operationalize. So if we think we can sit here as a franchisor and make up all the policies and processes, we can't. We're going to miss something. We're going to have inadvertent consequences. So it's working with franchisees and absolutely being proactive and linking it back to the fact that the reason we're doing this is so we all have a business to run at the end of the day. All have that opportunity.
Is it in danger of becoming overly regulated?
Oh, absolutely. There certainly is that chance, and that's probably where you come back to the comments around how many pieces of paper and how many pages that you have to hand out to a prospective franchisee or existing franchisee. So I think why do regulators step in? They step in because quite often something on the edge went wrong, right? We talk about the 1% of misconduct, not the 99% of the time it goes right. So as a community, what can we do as a franchising community to try and remove those things happening and bring in the right ethics and practices and codes to live by, so that we don't have to over-regulate. Regulation's got a great role and we need it, and it protects us and protects the consumer, and we need to make sure that's there. But we need to make sure that we don't go over-regulation, because that can add, I'd say, cost at no one's benefit. It doesn't help the consumer. The costs get passed on, doesn't help the franchisee or the franchisor. But I think getting back to how do we have the right ethics and culture, and it's almost like our franchisees will self-administer to each other quite often. If someone's doing the wrong thing, they understand, they'll pull them in a line. So as franchisors, how can we do that as well and work within the industry to pull each other up and say, hey, you need to step back and align. You're putting us all at risk here.
I think the danger is when you over-regulate, and there's no question that the sector is over-regulated when you compare it to other sectors and when you compare it to retail more generally, or when you compare it to somebody starting a business from scratch that's not part of a franchise network that doesn't have those requirements. That you're putting a layer of cost in, you're putting a layer of bureaucracy in, and you're clouding the issue for many people. You can't see the wood for the trees if you've got, as Jake says, a 400-page document to get through. So it's taking a common sense approach to regulation, which I think is important. Nobody in the sector is questioning the need for regulation. It's important. We want to protect the brand and protect people's investment, but it's a sensible common sense approach that I think is required. Not the frenzy that you tend to get, as Jake says, when things happen around the edges, as they inevitably do, and they happen like that in every industry.
Absolutely.
Just looking at the time, everyone, so we might start opening the questions up to the audience. So if you do have questions and you want to put them in the Q&A, and then we'll bring this to our panel. So if I'll give you a couple of minutes to put them in. If, Brian, you've got one more thing you want to kind of continue on while we collect the questions from the audience.
Yeah, I'm going to jump into the future a little bit for a moment, if I can, and really ask this question initially to Anthony. The last mile fulfillment, the growth of dark stores in time to come, physical outlets being distribution hubs for online deliveries. And if I think about a franchise network, you have a wonderful advantage in terms of physical distribution points. What does that mean for the adaptability of a franchisee in time to come? And maybe some thoughts around the economic model that might come from that. And I think you touched on that earlier when we started to talk about omnichannel.
Yeah, I did.
And I was thinking about that 15 to 20% of business, and some cases more, some cases less. And there's no doubt we will move to physical networks being distribution hubs, as well as customer facing, if you like. How do you see that playing out?
It's an interesting one. Look, I think, I think it's common knowledge that the margins made in an e-com space is certainly less than in a traditional bricks and mortar for any retailer or for the majority of retailers. So, I think in terms of distribution and distribution hubs, it also is very much driven through the type of product that the retailer is selling. So, for us at Clark Rubber, we're selling mattresses. And for us, it just simply doesn't make sense to be distributing mattresses from a central location, maybe at a state-based point, out to consumers. It makes perfect sense to be able to provide those items and fulfill those at a regional level out of every one of our stores. Each business, each type of business and retailer selling the products that they will establish a way forward that suits them. If it's clothing, it's very easy to be able to freight that type of product and centralise the fulfilment of that. Undoubtedly, though, within a franchising business, the viability of the business is determined based on all of the franchise owners being able to forge a living and having a successful business. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. So, I see that there's definitely a benefit to be able to leverage local distribution. But again, it depends on, purely the scale. If you got a $500 million a year business in an e-com sense as a retail business, it just simply might not be commercially viable to pick and pack at a store level. The economies may drive centralisation of that type of activity. One of the things that I'll leave you with is that, we're in an environment of significant change, and those that will survive are those that are agile and able to adapt and be able to pick the path that they need to go down and make the investment into their businesses and infrastructure accordingly.
That's pure Darwinism, isn't it? Adaptation of the strongest and the fittest. But I'm reminded of Richard's comment earlier that said franchising grew by having rules, parameters, and structures. And now we're saying, well, we want that at the base level, but be entrepreneurial, play to your talents, be agile. So we're asking for quite a lot of cultural shift and possibly even shift in the franchisees that we engage with in the future. Any thoughts on that, Richard?
Yeah, I think customers are clearly saying they want better products, they want them cheaper, and they want them faster. And we therefore have to, and I don't think that's changed, in recent years. And I think that we've got to take some of the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic. One of those is that when you have a pandemic, you have a supply chain crisis, and some of these supply chain crises and economic crises are going to last for a long time. So we've got to be able to adapt, have flexible business models. I think Anthony was absolutely spot on. In some industries, it makes sense to have product at a local level and distribute from a store. Sometimes it makes sense to do it from a DC. But I think the thing that we've got to do as franchisors is say, how do we give customers the choice? If you go back right to the beginning, and customers are clearly saying, well, if I want to, there are times when I want something straight away. And if I want to wear it tonight, then there has to be a premium, and we have to be smart enough to charge appropriately for that. And I don't think, as retailers, we've necessarily been good in the past about sticking to that. So if we give everything away and below the lines, we've only got ourselves to blame. But if we are able to tailor our products and our services and say, here's an offering that lets you get it from a store, you can pick it up, you can have it delivered from your local store, or if you want to wait a couple of days, we can get it to you from a central DC. And here's the price point.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're setting ourselves up for success.
Pardon me. I think I agree, and I think what you and Anthony are both cleverly saying is that we've grown from one size fits all to one size fits one.
Yep.
And accordingly we adapt the environment. Jake, before I move to general questions, any thought on that around that?
I was just going to add a little bit. I think it also, to the point that we had this set of rules and now we're asking everyone to change. It's really interesting as we go through franchise interviews and who we bring on as a franchisee as well, right? And it's, we do, and back to the Greg, I saw some comments, the cultural and ethic thing. We put every prospective franchisee through psychometric testing to make sure they're going to fit our, the future franchisee we want. And a lot of franchisees ask me, are your products, yes, I see what products you've got to sell. Are there any changes coming? I said, well, we're entering a 5-year partnership. So yes, but I don't know what they are. So, but it's this element around sort of, you've now bringing people on with the expectation that there will be changes to your products and services over that period of time. And they will have to learn to adapt within that period of time. But the rapidly shifting environment means we don't know exactly what that will be. Richard was talking about COVID and the pandemic and what that drove. We've got, we talk about investment from a franchisor. We've got over 25 IT projects underway right now. If I look at all my CapEx, it's 95% of it's in IT. There's a lot of investment in people around that as well and other things. But I think the franchisee coming on board are now needing to be more aware that they've got this great brand and support structures around them to help them be successful, but they're going to have to be adaptable to change across their tenure of their agreements.
Yeah, great responses, gentlemen. Anastasia, I think.
Yeah, we're getting quite a few questions in, so I'll start off with a couple of them and jump in if you think you can answer. So one great question, and I think we've probably touched on this, but given most franchisees are still baby boomers, Gen X, and then obviously one of the great stats at the moment is our millennial customers are our largest spending demographic now. So how do you bring these franchisees up to speed of, that their customers are not necessarily themselves, and how do you get them to be more digital savvy? Is the things that we're bringing into play.
Who would like to go first on that one? Anthony?
Yeah, look, I'll take that one. I think, the key is investing into the right programs to get to know who your customers are, and, I'll reflect on a project that we undertook with none other than the retail doctor a couple of years ago on consumer insights. And this is not a paid plug, mind you, but
keep it coming.
At the juncture that we were in our business, looking at investing heavily into redefining our retail footprint, that is the aesthetics of our stores, as well as then looking at our e-com investment and the path forward. it's really key to know the customer, know the current customer and also know the customer you're seeking to go after. And so we made that investment, and then we invested heavily in sharing that information and bringing up to speed our franchise partners so that they could understand the journey we were about to embark on and we currently are working through. So I think, understanding the customer is key. Ultimately in a retail business, you're in business to, not only provide products and services that your customers want, but provide that experience to keep them coming back.
I think that's key, to give the franchisee the why we are doing what we're doing. Here's the reasoning, here's the data, this is what our customers are saying, and then give them the skills, the training to actually then bring them up to speed to do that, I think.
Interesting.
Another question, looking on here, we've touched on employment, but in the current market, what are you doing to actually try and change this? Is there any sort of specific things that you are doing to address the issues around finding staff?
Jake, would you like?
Yeah, well, it's a challenging one, right? And it's probably one of our biggest challenges right now. We're in an industry where the demand grew heavily. Yeah, everyone thought it would collapse off COVID, but it actually grew. We're going to do a record sales year this year, but you need more people to do that. And what we are finding, low unemployment, Anthony was talking about before, is we used to put up ads on Seek and you get lots of good quality applicants, whereas you don't now. And you're not getting the same level of applicants. So there's a lot more different way we're going about it. And also, for our franchisees, recruiting as well. For lending managers, they're competing against big corporates that are offering, big salaries up front. Staff can come to our franchisees and earn as much, but it's more of a success type model, variable REM model. So we're having to change the way we do it because the traditional methods aren't working. So we've started using sort of employment agencies a lot more. And what we're actually starting to do even more and more is bring on people that have the right service ethics and service behaviours and willingness to learn our way and the RAMS way and the RAMS processes and train them up with that. So if we look at some of the great, really successful ones, the franchisees are willing to spend more time on the training and the investment of the people up to our processes and what's required in our industry. And so really focusing the target less so around, I need a loan writer that's got X number of years experience. It's around, I need a customer service specialist who has the capability to learn finance, and then investing the time and effort in teaching and training them up. So it opens up different pools of employees. For example, with us, we actually find nurses, probably some of the best employees we can get in a home loan manager, because they have a genuine care for customers and they'll genuinely try and find the right thing for them. So certainly having to look at different avenues. I'd say the old plug an ad up online and see who applies doesn't work. A lot of it's how we get customers as well as how we get staff is word of mouth. We've had customers that have turned into staff, interviewed them, thought this person's really good. Do you want a job? That's happened in our franchises. So I think you've got to be a lot more innovative around that.
I think that's a fantastic point. And I like this sort of looking outside the box, looking into different areas, different people, and how do we bring them? And I think you're right. It's what are we offering? What's the change? Fantastic. I'm just going to move on to the next question. Just in the essence of time. So Richard's maybe one that you can answer. In the increasing disclosure requirements of the Franchising Code of Conduct, do you think they're becoming a barrier to network management and growth?
Yeah, look, I think they are. And I think, as I said before, the increasing amount of regulation is going to turn people away from the sector if we're not careful. So as franchisors, we've got to turn it into plain English information for people and make it really easy for them to understand, I guess, what the offering is. And also, I think we've also got to paint a picture of what the prospects are for people. We can't go out and we can't promise a level of income necessarily, and we certainly can't forecast profitability. But I think what we can do is put incoming franchisees and potential franchisees in touch with people who run really successful businesses, and model and franchise systems that are willing to do that always do well. And can I just make a comment on what Jake said as well, that I can see with interest rates going up, and if they keep going up at this rate, Jake, you'll definitely need more nurses for customers.
Yeah.
Doctors.
Thank you. Psychologists, maybe.
I think we have seen that on that previous point in that people are willing to take on staff and train them, because we've seen the rise of training and the need for training even more so now. So I think, yeah. I
actually think it'll be a good thing. So, and it's painful right now. It's hard to get people, but what it's forcing businesses to do is to invest in people and to train again. And I think that there was a distinct lack of that happening before. So I think, fast forward 5 or 6 years, and people will be trained, and companies will have a structure in place that they've had to put in place now to survive, frankly.
And I think on that, Richard, it's a really important topic. So sorry to labour on it, Anastasia, but the other side of that then is the retention of your staff, and how do we make sure the employment proposition there is to retain? And we do analysis with our franchisees, and we've been sharing some insights at our regional meetings recently on, where the turnover in some franchises hasn't been, what's acceptable and the cost to them of the business. But what I think, we're here to talk about future of franchising, that one of the great things around the franchise model is that they can bring in, and you can employ someone at that local level and have that small business entrepreneurial offering of what you can do with your staff. You can, you've got more flexibility than if they're working for a big corporate. But compared to, say, a standalone small business, you've got the support of a bigger entity and a bigger family to work with. And the offering we have, we run state-based forums where you get every staff member from the franchise in together, and we have a great day and guest speakers and career development opportunities and awards nights and stuff. And I think that this intersection of small business, local family-owned element, but then the support of a bigger network is a really big driver for retention and employment offering. And I think franchisors have got to work out how we can leverage that to help our franchisees in the staff retention side as well. And I think we're in a unique and amazing position to do that. And I think we've got a much better opportunity in that intersection of sort of large corporate and small business ownership.
Very good answer. I'm reminded of the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast, when I listened to you talk this morning.
100%.
Now, we've only got time for a couple more questions. So there's one here. Scott says, loving the brand, respecting the brand and protecting the brand really hits home. So, he's saying some great comments. His question was, what do we think is the greatest challenge for regional franchisees? He's specifically asking Jake for this one. So,
happy to help. I actually think, I don't see so there's some challenges, but there's some huge opportunities. So your challenges quite often is if you're in a city, you've got a lot more potential customers in a tight, compact area. Where you're at regional, you might be in a town of 20,000, 100,000 people versus millions of people around looking for your products. But I think there's huge opportunity as well in regional, and I actually see it for us as a massive opportunity. In one way, it's much easier to build out your brand in a local connected community. What you also are seeing is you see, it is an area where you're seeing the big corporates. You look at retail department stores, you look at bank branches, where they're actually pulling out of the regional towns for an economics point of view. And that provides a huge opportunity for us and for a prospective franchisee to go in and open up against the trend and to be, promote and build that local community connection. Do the things that sometimes the bigger players won't do with the local sports club sponsorships, involvements, engagements, really get involved in driving the local chamber of commerce. So whilst I think there's some, from ours, you've got that bigger, tighter, bigger loan sizes in the city, the regional provides a huge, unique opportunity to really build that local community and local culture, which is what franchising is about. And so I think for me, it's the economics are slightly different in regional versus city, but again, you can get a shop for 20 grand, and we've got some people in the city paying 100,000+ in rent. So there's different pros and cons. The employment opportunities are different as well. So I think it's a huge opportunity, and you've got to think both the challenges, but those opportunities. And I think really in particular that the bigger entities and, for us, banks shutting down, and we've got a place to invest against the trends and really win in those spaces. And
I think if we come back to one of the earlier consumer trends, it's about building that community customers are, what pandemics kind of taught them is that they appreciate community and local area and getting to know people a lot more. And we still even see, word of mouth being the number one influencer. So you've got a lot more aspects of that in the regional space.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think when your mascot is a talking ram, you've got a structural advantage in regional areas.
Yeah, we do, Richard, and the office names in head office here. I'm sitting in the wool shed, and next to me is the shearer's shed.
Exactly.
Now the rooms are called the paddock, the merino, Raymond a ram, and the golden fleece. So we are definitely leverage
You
that
guys
local.
are along with the whole regional thing quite well.
And just final question before we wrap up. So this is a nice nitty-gritty one to finish on. What principles do you use or thoughts do you think about guiding online revenues being split fairly with franchisees? Lovely to finish on a nice...
I thought this would come up at some point.
I thought this was a good one to finish on.
Might ask Anthony just to give us his thoughts.
Yeah, look, well, the franchisor should keep all of the revenue. Let's be honest. Look, I'll tell you what we do at Clark. We're a facilitator. We provide the facilitation of e-commerce transactions, and we allocate those out to our franchisees to fulfil based on postcodes. We've seen, certainly different times of the year, our percentage of click and collect versus delivery swings quite highly towards click and collect, particularly over the Christmas period. And I'm talking circa 70% of our transactions are click and collect. And that's something that I love because, this is about bringing that whole omni-channel together and bringing that into bricks and mortar, that traffic. But we as the franchisor, we don't keep any of the transactions. We distribute 100% to our franchise partners. And that's something that is very key for the delivery of our e-com strategy.
It's a great answer, and it's a great capstone around the whole omni-channel experience, using online to bring people back into the physical environment. It's a value add. Yeah, I think it's a really nicely.
We want to see that online is a contemporary. It's a value add in our business. It's not a competing force. We don't want our franchise partners to feel that way. And that's why, we continue to invest significantly into that space and will do into the future.
I think you're spot on, Anthony, and I can see in the attendee list we've got a number of people from Snap, and the Snap printing business is another great example of what's been an offline business for the last 100 years and has had to adapt very quickly during the pandemic and took, I think, a really neat approach to it, which is to say this is another new stream of business that will treat exactly the same way.
Yeah.
I think once people see that they're going to be somehow penalised by being omni-channel or having an online channel or it's competing with them, then it's game over. I think Anthony's absolutely spot on.
Yeah, very true.
Fantastic. All right. Well, to just wrap up the session there, I think we've had a great. I just quickly want to jump on and share as everybody loves, a nice QR code. We are conducting a retailer sentiment survey at the moment, and this will be available to all of our Retail Doctor Group community. So it's going to finish towards the end of this month. So scan the QR code and give us your thoughts and your opinions on what is happening in retail now and what is happening in retail, where you think it's going to go in the future. So we really want to hear from retailers. We want to understand, like all of our panelists have talked about today, what you think is going to happen moving forward, what you think are the big priorities. And then if everyone's scanned that QR code, if you haven't got it working, just feel free to drop me an email or LinkedIn and I can send you a link, because that then moves very nicely into our next event, which is actually going to be face-to-face and will be available online afterwards. So you can register now at retaildoctorgroup.com.au/events. We'll have all of our events for the rest of the year. The next one, we are going to talk about our 2022 retailer and consumer sentiment research. So what are consumers saying and what does this mean for retailers? So this will be held face-to-face on the 13th of July at the Kirribilli Club in Sydney. And it will be available online afterwards for all of our friends in the other states. So register now, come and join us for the event. just a little bit of a plug there. Obviously, this is the 20th in our State of the Nation events, so we really are getting quite a few happening there. So give us your opinion, give us your thoughts, and then we will be sharing all of the research at this event, and then it will be available to download afterwards. So as a thank you to everybody. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I just want to thank each of you gentlemen and Anastasia for balancing the gender inequality today. But more importantly, fantastic commentary, great contribution today, great contribution to the sector. So Richard, Jake, Anthony, thank you very much. As leaders in the community, it just shines in your insights and commentary. So thank you very much on behalf of myself and the team at Retail Doctor Group. And we'll have these copies available for you to distribute as well, of course. And wish you all the best. Thank you. And we look forward to talking soon.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.